Yeah, I'm going to miss James Watt. I really miss James Watt, as I missed Earl Butts.
He's not going to miss you.
No, he's not going to miss me.
Who can't you tease and make jokes about?
Mother Teresa's a bad subject.
I would think so.
You don't get big laughs from Mother Teresa.
He wasn't just the king of late night, he was its gatekeeper. Johnny Carson ran The Tonight Show with charm, precision, and a quiet authority that few dared to challenge. But when certain guests crossed invisible lines through ego, chaos, or something far worse, they didn't just get a cold stare. They got banned for life. Carson's blacklist was real, and once your name was on it, there were no callbacks, no apologies, no comebacks. One guest walked into his office unannounced and left with a permanent exile. These aren't tabloid tales. They're the backstage truths behind television's most exclusive couch. And Carson never forgot who broke the code. 7. Bob Hope. Bob Hope's ban from The Tonight Show shocked many, given his stature as a comedy legend, Hollywood icon, and longtime NBC golden boy. But despite his historic contributions to entertainment, Hope's methodical, overly produced approach clashed hard with Johnny Carson's vision for the show. In Carson's world, charm came from spontaneity, the unexpected laugh, the unrehearsed response, the surprise twist in conversation. Hope, however, walked into The Tonight Show studio with folders of index cards, tightly scripted jokes, and cues for Carson to follow. To Johnny, who prided himself on jazz-like improvisation, it felt like being forced to read sheet music in a jam session. Hope's team often delivered packets to The Tonight Show staff well in advance of taping, complete with suggested questions, pre-written punchlines, brand mentions, and even ideal camera angles for his reactions. He insisted on these elements to control how he appeared on screen. This production-heavy approach might have suited network specials, but it drained the energy from Carson's freewheeling format. During interviews, Hope would rarely deviate from the cards. If Carson tried to pivot or toss in an unscripted follow-up, Hope would pause awkwardly, shuffle his index cards, then return to the pre-planned material, as if on autopilot. It has not been so immediate, the tension between the two legends. For years, Hoy came to terms with the rigidity of this man called Hope as a show of respect for his career and contributions. But respect just began to wear out slowly. Word among the NBC staff states that Carson reached his breaking point with the live shooting in 1978 when the elder comedian managed to plug Texaco, a few of his major sponsors, thrice in 7 minutes. It came not so much like an offhand mention, but more like a sales pitch. Carson, who was rolling his eyes at that time, shot back. "So much for Texaco getting more screen time than I am." Although off-camera, the wickedness changed to frustration when he simply told his producers, "I won't do infomercials under the guise of interviews." Carson's ire with Hope had roots that ran deeper than simply riling him up. It was an example of the kind of precedents these appearances set. If one guest could hijack the program for self-promotion, who's to say others wouldn't follow in that same vein? He obviously undermined the integrity of The Tonight Show, as well as positioning Carson awkwardly in bazaars where second fiddles would be played to marketing agendas. Carson was strong, despite NBC's reluctance to piss off such a bankable star. He made it no less clear to network honchos. Either scripted Hope appearances ceased, or he reevaluated his future with the show. In its fear of losing the best late-night asset, NBC relented, and so stopped the invitations for Bob Hope. There never were any public eruptions between the two. According to hearsay, Hope was never told formally that he was banned at all, just not invited back. The bookers stopped calling. Once regular appearances began to slip further into memory. Inside NBC, producers understood the meaning. If you wanted to be on Carson's couch, You had to follow Carson's rules. That meant being there, being flexible, and being real. Not reading off a cue card as if a teleprompter were hidden in the studio lights. But, unlike so many tabloid scandals, Hope's absence was noted by fans. Carson remained ever diplomatic in his relations, refusing to directly criticize Hope. When asked about the legendary comedian, Carson always showed respect, sometimes casting a complimentary word on Hope's USO work or television specials, but he never pushed for a reunion. To the insiders, the schism was apparent. Hope was the old-school TV, highly controlled, calculated, sponsor-driven. Carson was more relaxed, and where authenticity mattered. And when that divide became too wide to bridge, even a legend like Bob Hope had ended up being an outsider. Indeed, the Hope Band exemplified Carson's preference for tone and quality over nostalgia and celebrity. If The Tonight Show were alive and spontaneous and had some human being conducting it, it could never be a safe platform for product promotion. By this decision, Carson quietly set an exacting rule. Even stars of the first order could not rewrite the rules in his house. Just when Carson thought he'd seen every form of disruption, one guest turned laughter into collateral damage. Live, loud, and completely out of bounds. It's Don Rickles. Don Rickles, the razor-tongued insult comic beloved by millions, was a frequent and riotous presence on The Tonight Show, until his unfiltered chaos finally caught up with him. Rickles' trademark style was rapid-fire mockery, aimed at everyone in sight. Fellow guests, audience members, even Carson himself. Often, this mayhem worked brilliantly, turning otherwise routine episodes into comedy gold. But behind the scenes, the staff learned to brace themselves whenever Rickles appeared. While his on-air energy was electric, his disregard for studio protocol and physical space became a recurring problem, culminating in a moment that would effectively end his relationship with Carson's stage. The infamous turning point occurred in 1976, while Rickles was guest hosting the show during one of Carson's vacations. During a break between interviews, Rickles reached for Carson's beloved walnut cigarette box, a sentimental keepsake reportedly gifted by a stagehand who had once saved Carson from a fire. Rickles, improvising for laughs, flailed the box in the air as a prop before accidentally snapping the lid off. The audience laughed as Rickles joked, "Oh, I broke Carson's cigarette box." But the real reaction came the next night, when Carson returned, discovered the damage, and decided to turn his frustration into a live bit. What eventually happened has gone on to become one of the most replayed moments in the history of NBC. Carson burst into the set of CPO Sharkey, the sitcom Rickles was working on next door, with the broken box in hand and cameras rolling. "You broke my box," Carson told Rickles, at which everybody went into a fit of laughter. Rickles playfully crouched down, and the moment instantly became part of late-night mythology. Yet while the audience laughed, the insiders understood it was a veiled threat. The busted box had become a metaphor for a much bigger one. Translated, Rickles crossed the line from spontaneous into downright reckless. The Tonight Show rumor mill has it that he regularly ignored any timing lights meant to signal guests to hurry up, thus disrupting the pacing of the show. He often improvised his way off the script and caused derailment of segments, not to mention inflicting damage on props more than a few times. Carson appreciated brilliance, but he also appreciated control, the kind that allowed him to shape the entire episode into a polished whole. Rickles, brilliant though he was, made that increasingly difficult. Producers were left scrambling to cut or shift material on the fly whenever Rickles went on one of his tirades, and not every episode survived intact. The last straw, it seems, was in 1985, when Rickles poked fun at a hefty woman in the front row of a taping. Although it struck a chord with some in the audience, within days, there were thousands of complaint letters rolling into NBC. The stir put Carson on the move. He was getting tired of Rickles' kookiness anyway, and now the network itself was at risk for reputation damage. Quietly, but very effectively, Carson told his crew Rickles was no longer to be asked back. The ban wasn't public, such that the next time he was brought up during a booking meeting, the producers simply answered, "He's off the list." However, there was no public animosity between Carson and Rickles despite the ban. At every party and industry affair, they were warm and friendly, often teasing each other with jokes and jibes. However, it was different inside Studio One. Rickles was through. The stagehands joked that there was no longer any need for danger pay when not around Rickles, no flying ashtrays, no panicked cutaway shots, and no guests storming off the stage. The studio took on a much more predictable schedule, with Carson's control of the show still intact. It held Rickles well in other places, not the least of which was Las Vegas, the roasts, guest spots over at other shows, but The Tonight Show never again became one of those venues. His disqualification shed a whole new light on the caliber of the show standards. No matter how funny one was, chaos could never exceed structure. In Carson's world, comedy was welcomed, even wild comedy, but one had to respect the stage itself. Rickles broke the box, literally and figuratively, and that could never be repaired. 5. Wayne Newton. Wayne Newton's exile from The Tonight Show wasn't merely the result of an awkward celebrity spat. It was the consequence of a deeply personal confrontation that crossed a boundary even Johnny Carson refused to overlook. Newton, once dubbed Mr. Las Vegas, was the target of a Carson monologue joke that poked fun at his famously thick hair. Las Vegas is installing brighter stage lights. Wayne Newton's hair needs photosynthesis. The audience roared, but Newton wasn't laughing. At the time, he was heavily invested in the Aladdin Hotel and building an image rooted in glamour and respectability. That quip, seemingly harmless on the surface, reportedly stung hard enough to prompt Newton into action. Rumors circulated that in 1980, Wayne Newton arrived unannounced at NBC's Burbank studio during a taping day. Security footage allegedly showed Newton in a silk shirt, chest exposed, marching down the corridors with clenched fists. What followed was one of the most infamous off-air confrontations in late-night lore. According to multiple accounts from staff, Newton burst into Carson's office during a quiet script review and delivered a heated ultimatum. "These jokes about me will stop, and they'll stop now, or I will kick your ass at this," he reportedly warned. The tone, body language, and closed-door tension were said to be unmistakably threatening. Carson, stunned but composed, immediately called in security and had Newton escorted off the premises. That solitary encounter was sufficient for Carson to hand down an instantaneous and everlasting ban. From thenceforth, Wayne Newton's name became anathema for all Tonight Show bookings. Internal memos with a picture of Newton, instructing NBC security and production teams to refuse him entry into the building, were sent out. Carson never broached the incident publicly, yet within the inner circle he conveyed his sentiments that intimidation was not allowed in his studio, not even if the intimidator was truly famous. This rule of thumb, along with Carson's unquestioned mastery of the control over the show environment, made Newton's ban one of the most absolute bans in Tonight Show history. Reportedly, the NBC executives tried to fix the rift backstage. Newton was an important name, and a turn on The Tonight Show would be of great help for album sales and ticket revenues. But Carson jealously refused any kind of gesture toward an epitaph. Newton himself, never divulged this incident to the public. However, over the years, The rift between the two was known and talked about across the circulating gossip circles of Las Vegas and Hollywood. The whole incident became part of the show's canon as a reminder that even the ironest hosts had their limits, and that threats, even rumored ones, weren't to be ignored. Interestingly, Carson's staff made it a policy to remove any references to Newton in future scripts for the sake of professionalism, not in fear of reprisals. Carson would explain that it was about maintaining the tone and culture of the show rather than revenge. Other guests could amend their situations after tense appearances or offhanded remarks, but physical threats, or even the mere suggestion of one, were seen within Carson's realm as career-ending sins. The Newton incident was a case study for producers on handling future guest relations issues. Carson thought threats were the limit. Another guest stepped in with a different kind of deception, one that unfolded right under the spotlight. 4. Uri Geller. Uri Geller's appearance on The Tonight Show in 1973 has gone down in television history as a defining moment in Carson's ongoing battle against pseudoscience and charlatanism. Geller, an Israeli performer who claimed psychic abilities, especially the power to bend metal objects with his mind, was booked on the show amid rising public curiosity and controversy. Carson, a lifelong amateur magician himself, had little patience for those who passed off stage tricks as supernatural phenomena. Behind the scenes, Carson conspired with famed skeptic James Randi to put Geller's claims to the test in front of a national audience, all without tipping him off. Randi's involvement ensured that Geller wouldn't have access to any props he might have manipulated in advance. Sealed film canisters, untouched metal spoons, and envelopes with concealed drawings were prepared by Carson's team and guarded until the moment of the broadcast. Carson introduced Geller with his usual charm, teasing that the night might bend some minds, maybe even some metal. What followed was one of the most uncomfortable Tonight Show segments ever aired. Geller, visibly rattled, struggled to perform. He pressed sealed envelopes to his forehead, muttered that he felt drained, and ultimately produced no verifiable psychic phenomena. Geller would put his failures down to the studio atmosphere, hostile energy, and even the lunar cycle. Carson remained polite, but made several direct hits, probing if Geller would require as long in the next life. The audience, initially interested, soon began to grow bored. Geller's behavior went from confident to sheepish. He continued to stall himself with claims that the environment made it hard to feel strong. Carson didn't insult him, but his clever, dry delivery left little doubt that he was unimpressed. After the show, Carson made his judgment clear to his producers. Uri Geller would never be invited back. Geller later tried to stop syndication or explain his way out of the situation with interviews and press tours, according to rumors. By that time, however, the damage was done. Carson felt the show had done a public service by exposing Geller's failure to perform under genuine scrutiny. Thousands of letters from viewers came in. Some praised Carson for his integrity, while others felt that he had ambushed Geller. Geller argued that the incident was planned to embarrass him, thus adding further fuel to the fire. Curiously, Geller's long-term reputation seemed unscathed. In fact, bookings must have increased somewhat right after the show. A number of people believed his story that NBC and Carson had conspired to make him look foolish, thus adding to Carson's bitterness. Supposedly, he said later, "We exposed him and made him rich, but never again here." After that, The Tonight Show instituted a rule. Props would have to be supplied by and under the control of the show for any and all paranormal demonstrations. No exceptions would be made, and any so-called fraudster, in Carson's words, would be banned for good. The events that unfolded behind the scenes were actually the origin of the Geller controversy as a litmus test for how The Tonight Show would treat a magical claim. Carson cared deeply for upholding credibility, and his take on the Geller episode was not one of mistake, but a win for transparency, even if it unwittingly increased Geller's fame. All future segments featuring supposed psychics, mentalists, or mystics would have to be even more closely scrutinized. For Carson, the price to pay for allowing deception to slide unchecked was far too high. He had always had a reputation, he thought, built on authenticity and showmanship, and not on trickery disguised as truth. 3. Chevy Chase. Chevy Chase's ban from The Tonight Show serves as a cautionary tale in late-night history, not because of scandal or violence, but due to sheer hubris. When Chase first appeared in 1976, he was a rising star, fresh off the success of Saturday Night Live. That visit was marked by good humor, modesty, and playful banter. Carson appreciated the newcomer's wit, even chuckling at a few barbs about his golf swing. But just 2 years later, Chase returned as a full-blown celebrity, riding high on foul play's box office success, and brought with him a dramatically different energy. The easy charm had been replaced with swagger, and Carson noticed instantly. Rumors persist that Chase, moments before his second interview segment began, openly joked backstage about the possibility of taking over The Tonight Show someday. While it may have been offhand, what followed on air left little room for interpretation. Chase opened by bragging about his weekend box office numbers. 10 million in 3 days. Not bad for a guy who used to fall downstairs, huh? Then, gesturing toward Carson's desk, he added, "You've got quite the comfortable little operation here." The comment received a few chuckles from the audience, but Carson's smile reportedly grew strained. The mood shifted palpably. As Carson tried steering the conversation toward Chase's new film, the guest veered off into a rambling story about celebrity encounters at LAX. The film never came up. Then came the comment that sealed his fate. "I could probably outdrive you, maybe even out-host you." The joke, delivered with a smirk, drew mixed laughter and a few gasps. According to crew members, Carson kept his expression neutral, but his fingers began rhythmically tapping his pencil, a familiar tell that irritation had set in. During the commercial break, Chase continued touting upcoming projects and reportedly offered to connect NBC with younger talent for the 11:30 slot. As soon as the cameras stopped rolling, Carson reportedly turned to his executive producer, Peter Lassalle, and said, "He is finished here." It was instantaneous and total banishment. For Carson, the offense was not just his, but also hers, as it was professional. To suggest or even joke about their possible replacement crossed into very sacred territory. Carson has spent 15 years making The Tonight Show with the utmost respect. There was no atom of irritation that would be tolerated against that legacy, especially on his own stage. From that time forward, Chevy Chase was persona non grata at Studio One at Burbank. From Hollywood, the rumor of a ban on Chase spread quickly. Apparently, Chase's reps made all kinds of efforts to patch things up, but Carson would not accept any of their calls. No letter, no explanation, just silence. Press approached Carson for comment when Chase started up his own late-night program on Fox in 1993. He snubbed every request. In interviews afterward, Chase confessed that all he had ever gotten from Carson was a long, unmistakable absence. There had never been encouragement or advice. 5 weeks later, the Chevy Chase show was canceled amid miserable ratings and universal condemnation. Among Carson's staff and former guests, there was a consensus that Chase had undervalued the job and overvalued his own worth. Carson didn't say a word about Chase. To the world, even with that edict. To give voice to this silent protest was palpable. Carson's silence rang more loudly than any shouting match between them. The wheels continued to grind on, though, at work in films and television for Chase. Never again would his name find a place on the guest list for The Tonight Show. Indeed, most became aware of it sometime later as one of the industry's folklore. The fact that respect had to be earned from Carson by all in order to get an invite to his stage. Behind the scenes, it broke precedent for guest behavior. Mocking the throne did not welcome a guest in. 2. Charlton Heston. Charlton Heston's ban from The Tonight Show wasn't born out of personal conflict or scandalous behavior, but rather from his inability or unwillingness to adapt to the rhythm of late-night television. Known for his towering screen presence and deep, deliberate voice, Heston brought with him a theatrical gravitas more suited to epic films and political conventions than to Carson's breezy, quick-paced interviews. While Carson respected Heston's acting legacy, repeated appearances revealed a consistent problem. Heston treated every question as the beginning of a monologue, often unrelated to what was asked, and rarely leaving room for conversation. Carson, who favored punchy, back-and-forth exchanges, struggled to rein in Heston's expansive style. A simple question like, "Did you get hurt filming the chariot scene?" might launch a 5-minute detour into stories of ranching as a child, stage training at Yale, or the philosophical meaning of courage. By the time Heston circled back to the actual injury, the moment was lost. Momentum drained, and the audience restless. Rumors among staff suggest Carson would often grip his pencil tighter and tighter during these moments, trying to maintain his composure as yet another answer drifted toward a history lecture. It was not a specific appearance that finally tipped Carson over the edge. After quite a few increasingly long-winded interviews, producers did a hasty cut of other segments to fit this one in. The final nail in the coffin may have been hammered in 1987 when he participated in a panel on movie violence, the same year that Heston spoke for about 15 minutes on freedom, the Constitution, and some slimy social values. This kind of monologue, leaving absolutely no space for humor and interaction, turned what was supposed to be light entertainment into a civics class. Then Carson went on to voice his frustration to producers. "He's running his own show within my show, and it's not funny." After that moment, Heston was put on a quiet blacklist. Producers were told to take him off all future booking lists. No official word was given. It was a quiet affair, Carson style. The story goes that Heston was not even aware he had been banned for a while. It was only during a failed attempt by his publicist to land Heston on the show again that the message rang true. The door was shut. Carson was known for his discretion, but also for his precision. If a guest crossed the line and disrupted the energy of the show, chances were they were dead in the water. It's not that Heston lacked talent or charisma, he simply didn't understand the medium. The Tonight Show was an intricate teeter-totter balancing entertainment and timing. Every little segment was to sell a sting, an insight, or charm, all in a small, digestible package or two. Heston, whose theatrical instincts and well-developed penchant for oratory tended to dominate the room, did this regularly. Audience data are said to have bolstered Carson's anger. Ratings tended to dip during Heston's segments, while counts for laughter prime measure of fell greatly when his answers lasted over a minute. When the show recovered from one slow-burning monologue, this last guest brought silence so heavy it nearly stopped the broadcast clock. 1. Fred Rogers. Fred Rogers, the gentle soul behind Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, seemed like an unusual candidate for Johnny Carson's blacklist. Known for his calm demeanor, soft voice, and unwavering kindness. Rogers was widely beloved across generations. When his booking was confirmed for The Tonight Show, producers expected a sweet, wholesome segment to balance the flashier celebrity guests. The plan was simple: a quick 5-minute chat, perhaps a puppet demonstration, and a dose of warmth before bedtime. But what played out on stage that night revealed a critical mismatch between personalities and a pace of conversation that brought the live show to a grinding halt. From the moment Rogers stepped onto the stage, the tempo of the program changed. He paused at center stage, gave a small wave, and softly said, "Thank you very much, friends. I'm very glad to be here." The audience clapped politely, unsure if he had finished his introduction. Carson, always the pro, tried to warm things up with a joke. "Fred, I wore my sneakers in your honor," lifting his foot to show off a bright white loafer. Rogers smiled and gently replied, "That's very thoughtful, Johnny. Sneakers can help us feel ready to play." What was meant to be a punchline turned into an awkward silence. Rogers didn't continue. He had finished his thought. It is said through staff gossip from that studio that panic gripped the control booth almost immediately. Cue card operators were pulling jokes in real time because timing went awry. Each beat Carson had prepared was now about several seconds behind. Rogers answered each question with oblique phrases that were soothing yet terribly out of sync with the rest of the show. While his delivery was perfect for preschoolers, it stood in stark contrast to the rapid-fire energy that is the trademark of 11:30 p.m. network television. The audience fidgeted in their seats as the producers noticed the real-time ratings slipped down point by point on the Nielsen monitor during the segment. After the break, Carson allegedly breathed out so sharply that the surface of the desk fogged up. The backstage vibe was tense, not because Rogers had said anything inappropriate about the text, but because his natural rhythm turned the show into molasses. This was a critical moment for Carson, who usually prides himself on pacing. Rogers was not vile, obnoxious, or demanding, he just doesn't fit in. In some post-show analysis, damage was confirmed. Producers noted that a 3-point dip occurred in the viewing levels of The Tonight Show during Rogers' segment, an unusual event for such a mainstream program. That night, however, Carson made an internal but strong resolution. According to rumors, Rogers was never formally told of the prohibition. He probably thought his appearance simply failed to lead to more invitations. Behind the scenes, however, the booking staff were told not to book him again. Carson, usually diplomatic, reportedly told his team, "Fred Rogers is the embodiment of sainthood, but saints are not successful in late night." Not out of malice, but simply professional pragmatism. The Tonight Show depended on energetic, quick delivery of the setup and punchline intimacy of timing and laughter. The night felt more like a bedtime story than a variety program because of Rogers' introspective pace and long pauses. Even Carson, a master of timing, struggled to match Rogers' slow, thoughtful rhythm. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed uncovering the untold stories behind Johnny Carson's guest blacklist, give this video a thumbs up, drop a comment with your favorite moment, and don't forget to subscribe for more behind-the-scenes legends. Want more late-night secrets? Click the next video on your screen. It's one you don't want to miss.